My name is Danielle, and I'm 29 years old. The first thing I remember is the steady beeping of machines, white ceiling sterile walls, the smell of antiseptic. I woke up alone in a hospital room, with no memory of how I got there. My head throbbed with pain I'd never felt before. The confusion was overwhelming. Nobody was there when I opened my eyes. A nurse walked in, her face filled with sympathy when she saw I was awake. That look told me everything I needed to know. Before I tell you what happened, let me know where you're watching from, and hit subscribe if you feel we might have something in common. Sometimes the people we think will always be there for us are the first ones to walk away. I had what most people would consider a good life before everything changed. I worked as a senior content strategist at a successful marketing firm in downtown Chicago. The job paid well enough for me to afford my cozy one-bedroom apartment in North Side, with its small balcony overlooking the neighborhood. I loved sitting there on weekend mornings with my coffee watching the city come alive. My relationship with Mason was hitting the 3-year mark, but things had been rocky for months. He was a software developer who worked from home most days, which made my long office hours and frequent weekend work sessions a constant source of tension. "You're married to your job, Danielle," he would say during our increasingly frequent arguments. "I'm starting to think there's no room for me in your life. I always promised to do better to make more time for us, but the demands of my career kept pulling me back in." Deep down, I knew the real reason I threw myself into work. It was the one place I felt truly valued. My parents, Carol and Richard Wilson, lived in a spacious suburban home outside Detroit where I grew up. From the outside, we looked like the perfect American family. Dad worked as a financial advisor, while Mom ran a successful real estate agency. They provided everything I needed materially growing up, but emotional support was a different story. From my earliest memories, their approval was conditional on achievement. A report card with all A's except for one B+ wasn't celebrated. It was met with, "What happened with that B+? You need to try harder." Piano recitals weren't opportunities for joy, but evaluations of my progress. Sports weren't for fun, but for college applications and scholarships. My 12th birthday stands out vividly in my memory. I had been practicing for months for my piano recital scheduled on my birthday. It was the first time I would play a Chopin piece in public, and I was both nervous and excited. I had reminded my parents for weeks. That evening, as I sat at the piano looking out at the audience, the 2 empty seats in the front row felt like a physical pain. They never showed up. When I got home, they were both working in their respective home offices. Mom looked up briefly when I walked in. "Oh, sweetie, we got caught up with important clients. You know how it is. Did it go well?" I nodded and went to my room, the certificate of participation clutched in my hand. I cried silently into my pillow that night, learning the lesson that would shape my relationships for years to come. I wasn't a priority. The pattern repeated throughout high school. They missed my debate team victories, my art show where I won first place. Even my acceptance to Northwestern University, which they had pushed me toward, was acknowledged with a quick "good job" before returning to their phones. My college graduation ceremony was the final straw. I scanned the crowd repeatedly, hoping to see them, despite knowing deep down they wouldn't be there. Their excuse was a last-minute real estate conference in Phoenix that couldn't be rescheduled. I accepted my diploma with a smile for the cameras while fighting back tears. I moved to Chicago immediately after graduation, partly because of job opportunities, but mostly to create some distance. I had studied business marketing instead of fine arts, my true passion because art doesn't pay the bills, Danielle. Our weekly phone calls became a ritual of disappointment. Each Sunday evening, I'd prepare myself for 20 minutes of them talking about their successes, followed by probing questions about my career advancement. Never my happiness, never my well-being, just accomplishments they could brag about to their friends. Last Thanksgiving, I spent 3 days preparing an elaborate meal in my apartment, hoping to finally impress them. I cleaned obsessively, bought new dinnerware, and even framed some photos of us together. When they arrived, Mom immediately pointed out a water spot on my wine glass, while Dad asked why I hadn't been promoted yet. They spent most of the evening on their phones handling urgent work matters. I should have paid more attention to the warning signs my body was sending. The headaches started about 6 months before my hospitalization. At first, they were mild enough to ignore with over-the-counter pain relievers. Then they intensified, sometimes leaving me unable to look at computer screens. the fatigue came next. Even after 8 hours of sleep, I would wake up feeling exhausted. Coffee became my lifeline, with my consumption increasing from 1 cup each morning to 5 or 6 throughout the day. The dizziness was the most frightening symptom. It would hit without warning while walking to a meeting, standing up from my desk, or even just turning my head too quickly. A few times I had to grab onto nearby furniture to prevent myself from falling. Jasmine, my closest friend at work, noticed the changes. "You need to see a doctor," she insisted, after finding me holding my head in my hands in the break room one afternoon. "I will," I promised, just after we finished the Peterson campaign. But one campaign led to another, and my medical concerns always took a back seat to work deadlines. In truth, I was scared of what the doctor might find, and even more scared of appearing weak or incapable. The drive to prove my worth through professional success had become my defining characteristic, just as my parents had taught me. Little did I know that my body was about to force a reckoning that would change everything. The day that changed my life forever started like any other Tuesday. I woke up with another throbbing headache, but this one felt different, more intense, more focused at the base of my skull. I took 2 extra-strength painkillers and hoped for the best. Mason and I had argued the night before about my upcoming business trip to New York. It would be the third weekend away in 2 months. "Do you even want this relationship anymore?" he had asked, his voice filled with frustration and hurt. "Of course I do," I replied automatically, though I wasn't entirely sure it was true. Our relationship had become another item on my checklist of achievements, another box to tick to prove I was succeeding at life. That morning, he barely spoke to me as I rushed to get ready. Just as I was heading out the door, my phone rang. It was my mother. "Danielle, are you coming home next weekend for your father's birthday dinner?" she asked without so much as a hello. "Mom, I can't. I have that New York trip I told you about last month," I explained, trying to keep the irritation from my voice. "You never make time for family anymore," she said with a sigh. "Your cousin Jennifer visits her parents every other weekend, and she has 3 children." The comparison stung, as it was meant to. "I'll try to come the following weekend," I offered, knowing I probably wouldn't. "Never mind. Your father will understand. He always does." The guilt trip was expertly deployed, leaving me feeling inadequate as I headed to the office. When I arrived, my boss Kevin immediately called me into his office. Our biggest client was threatening to pull their account unless we completely revamped their social media strategy by the end of the week. "I need you to lead this, Danielle. You're the only one who can save this account," he said, appealing to my need for validation. "I'm scheduling an emergency meeting with them this afternoon. Can you prepare something by then?" I nodded, ignoring the intensifying pain in my head. "Of course." Back at my desk, I worked frantically, skipping lunch and declining Jasmine's invitation to take a quick break. The painkillers had worn off, but I was too busy to get more. My vision occasionally blurred as I stared at my computer screen, forcing me to blink hard to refocus. At 2 o'clock, Jasmine stopped by my desk. "Danielle, you look awful," she said frankly. "You're pale as a ghost." "I'm fine," I insisted, gathering my materials for the meeting. "Just tired." "This isn't normal tired," she persisted. "Let me take you to urgent care." "After the meeting," I promised. "It's too important to miss." As I walked into the conference room, the fluorescent lights seemed to pierce directly into my brain. The client team was already seated, along with Kevin and several other colleagues. I forced a smile and began setting up my presentation, fighting the growing dizziness. I made it through the first few slides before the words on the screen began to swim before my eyes. The room started to tilt sideways, and a strange ringing filled my ears. I gripped the edge of the table, trying to steady myself. "Danielle," Kevin's voice sounded distant. "Are you okay?" I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. The last thing I remember is the horrified expressions of everyone around the table as my legs gave way. Someone gasped, papers scattered, then darkness. Voices penetrated the blackness periodically, urgent professional voices. "BP dropping. Get an IV started. Possible aneurysm, call neurology stat." I felt the sensation of movement, the vibration of wheels on pavement, the jarring stop of an elevator. Through it all, I couldn't open my eyes or speak. I was a passenger in my own body, powerless and terrified. I later learned that Jasmine had ridden in the ambulance with me, holding my hand the entire way. The paramedics had worked quickly to stabilize me, but my condition was critical. When we arrived at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, the emergency team was waiting. Dr. Amara Curtis, a neurologist with kind eyes and steady hands, took charge immediately. "Get her to CT now," she ordered after a quick assessment, "and call her emergency contacts." As they wheeled me toward the imaging department, Dr. Curtis turned to Jasmine. "Does she have family we should notify?" "Her parents," Jasmine replied, scrolling through my phone contacts. "They live in Michigan, and her boyfriend Mason. I'll call him myself." In the hazy space between consciousness and darkness, I registered the urgency in their voices. Something was very wrong with me. And in that moment of extreme vulnerability, my first coherent thought was a question. Would my parents finally show up for me now? The call to my mother was made by Nurse Elaine Thompson, a woman in her 50s with over 2 decades of experience delivering difficult news to families. She would later tell me that these calls were always challenging, but some responses stood out for their coldness. My mother's reaction was one she would remember. "Mrs. Wilson, this is Elaine Thompson calling from Northwestern Memorial Hospital in Chicago. I'm calling regarding your daughter, Danielle." There was a pause on the line. "What has happened? Is she all right?" "Your daughter has been admitted with a possible brain hemorrhage. She's currently unconscious and being prepared for emergency neurosurgery. The doctors would like to speak with you as soon as possible about her condition and treatment options." Another pause longer this time, the sound of muffled voices in the background. "I see. Well, my husband and I are in an important meeting right now. We simply can't leave immediately." Nurse Thompson, taken aback, tried to emphasize the severity. "Mrs. Wilson, I want to be clear that your daughter's condition is very serious. The doctors are concerned about—" "Yes, I understand," my mother interrupted. "But surely they can proceed with whatever treatment is necessary. We will try to get there as soon as we can. Perhaps tomorrow." "Ma'am, there's a possibility that decisions may need to be made regarding her care as she is currently unable to provide consent herself." "Well, do what you must. We trust the doctor's judgment. Please keep us informed of any major developments." And with that, the call ended. No questions about my prognosis. No request to speak to a doctor immediately. No indication they would drop everything to be at my side. Meanwhile, the CT scan had confirmed Dr. Curtis's suspicions. I had a subarachnoid hemorrhage bleeding in the space surrounding my brain caused by a ruptured aneurysm. My condition was deteriorating rapidly, and immediate surgical intervention was necessary. Dr. Marcus Chen, the neurosurgeon, called in for my case, reviewed the scans with growing concern. "We need to clip this aneurysm immediately. The bleeding is extensive." "We've contacted the family," Dr. Curtis informed him. "They said they can't come right away." Dr. Chen frowned. "Can't come. This is potentially life-threatening. Did they understand the severity?" According to Nurse Thompson, they were informed of the situation clearly. Dr. Chen shook his head slightly, then picked up the phone himself. As the head of neurosurgery, he rarely made these calls personally, but something about the situation compelled him to reach out directly. My father answered this time. "Richard Wilson speaking." "Mr. Wilson, this is Dr. Marcus Chen, Chief of Neurosurgery at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. I'm calling about your daughter Danielle. She has suffered a ruptured brain aneurysm and requires immediate surgery. The procedure carries significant risks, including stroke, brain damage, or even death. As her next of kin, we would typically ask for your consent, but given the emergency nature—" "Doctor." My father cut in, his tone businesslike. "My wife and I have a long-standing golf tournament today that we simply can't miss. It's an annual charity event that we sponsor. You have our permission to do whatever is necessary for Danielle. We trust your expertise." Dr. Chen was momentarily speechless. In his 20 years of practice, he had encountered all manner of family responses to crisis, but the casual dismissal of a child's life-threatening condition was rare. "Mr. Wilson," he tried again. "I don't think you understand. Your daughter could die without this surgery, and even with it, there are significant risks. Most families would want to be here. We understand the gravity of the situation, doctor, but we can't be there right now. We'll try to come tomorrow. Do what you need to do." The call ended, leaving Dr. Chen standing in the hallway, phone in hand, with a look of disbelief. He turned to Dr. Curtis, who had been waiting nearby. "I've never," he began, then shook his head. "Let's prep her for surgery. We have consent." The medical team was professional, but word spread quickly among the staff about my parents' response. Their indignation on my behalf translated into an even more attentive level of care. If my own parents wouldn't be there for me, they silently vowed the hospital staff would ensure I wasn't alone. As I was wheeled into the operating room, still unconscious, Nurse Thompson squeezed my hand. "We've got you, sweetheart," she whispered. The surgical team worked with precision for nearly 4 hours to clip the aneurysm and stop the bleeding. Throughout the procedure, my vital signs fluctuated dramatically, causing several tense moments when they feared they might lose me. But by early evening, the surgery was complete, and I was transferred to the neurosurgical intensive care unit for recovery. It was only then, as the immediate crisis passed, that Mason finally arrived at the hospital, having missed multiple calls from Jasmine while in a work meeting. His face went pale when he saw me bandaged and connected to numerous machines. He had been frustrated with me that morning, annoyed by my workaholic tendencies, never imagining that by nightfall he would be sitting beside my hospital bed, terrified I might not wake up. "I tried to reach her parents," Jasmine told him quietly as they stood in the hallway. "They said they couldn't come today." Mason's expression hardened. "Couldn't come? Their daughter almost died." Jasmine just shook her head. "That's what they said." The night passed slowly. Nurses came and went, checking vital signs, adjusting medications, monitoring for any signs of complications. Through it all, I remained unconscious, unaware of who was present and who was conspicuously absent from my bedside. The world came back to me in fragments. First there was pain, dull throbbing, all-encompassing. Then sounds, beeping machines, hushed voices, the squeak of rubber-soled shoes on linoleum. Finally, light filtered through my eyelids, too bright at first, forcing me to squint. When I managed to open my eyes fully, the first face I saw belonged to Nurse Elaine, who noticed immediately that I was awake. Her experienced eyes quickly assessed me before she smiled gently. "Welcome back, Danielle," she said, adjusting something on one of the machines beside my bed. "Try not to move too much. You've had surgery." I tried to speak, but my throat felt like sandpaper. Elaine brought a small cup of ice chips and carefully spooned one into my mouth. The cool moisture was the most wonderful thing I had ever felt. "What? What happened?" I finally managed to whisper. "You had a brain aneurysm that ruptured. Dr. Chen performed surgery yesterday to repair it. You're in the ICU now, and you're doing remarkably well, all things considered." I glanced around the room, registering the sterile hospital environment, the machines monitoring my vital signs, the IV in my arm, and the emptiness. No flowers, no cards, no family anxiously awaiting my return to consciousness. "My parents?" I asked, already dreading the answer. Elaine's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "We contacted them yesterday. They said they would try to come today." Try to come. 3 simple words that contained a lifetime of disappointment. Even now, with me lying in an intensive care unit after brain surgery, my presence in their lives was an inconvenience to be scheduled around more important matters. "Mason," I asked next. "Your boyfriend was here last night. He went home to get some rest and change clothes. He said he'd be back this morning." Before I could ask any more questions, Dr. Curtis entered the room. Her face brightened when she saw I was awake. "Danielle, good morning. I'm Dr. Amara Curtis, one of the neurologists on your case." She approached the bed and began checking my pupils with a small light. "Can you tell me what day it is?" "Tuesday, no Wednesday, I think." I wasn't entirely sure. "It's Wednesday, good. And your full name?" "Danielle Marie Wilson." "Excellent. Any pain on a scale of 1 to 10?" 7, I admitted. She nodded and made a note in my chart. "I'll have the nurse adjust your pain medication. You've been through quite an ordeal. You had what we call a subarachnoid hemorrhage caused by an aneurysm rupture. Dr. Chen successfully clipped the aneurysm, stopping the bleeding. The next few days will be critical for your recovery, but I'm encouraged by your alertness and orientation." I tried to absorb the information, but it felt surreal, like she was describing something that had happened to someone else. "When can I go home?" I asked. Dr. Curtis smiled gently. "Let's focus on recovery first. You'll likely be in the ICU for a couple of days, then transfer to a regular room for about a week, depending on your progress. After discharge, you'll need several weeks of rest at home before gradually returning to normal activities. The thought of being absent from work for so long sent a spike of anxiety through me that registered on the heart monitor. Dr. Curtis noticed but didn't comment directly. Your health has to be your priority right now, Danielle. Everything else can wait. After Dr. Curtis left, promising to return later, the door opened again to reveal Jasmine carrying a small bouquet of yellow roses. Her face lit up when she saw I was awake. "Thank God," she breathed, rushing to my bedside. "You scared the hell out of me, Danny." Despite the pain and confusion, I felt a rush of affection for my friend. "Sorry about that," I said weakly. "Don't you dare apologize. Just focus on getting better." She placed the flowers on the bedside table and took my hand. "How are you feeling?" "Like someone used my head for batting practice." She smiled, but I could see tears in her eyes. "The doctor said you were lucky. If it had happened at home instead of at work." She didn't need to finish the sentence. We both knew what she meant. If the aneurysm had ruptured while I was alone in my apartment, I might not have survived. After a moment of silence, I asked the question that had been nagging at me since I woke up. "Jasmine, do you know if anyone called my parents?" Her expression changed, becoming guarded. She glanced toward the door as if hoping someone would interrupt us. "They were called right away," she said carefully. And Jasmine hesitated. "Danny, maybe we should talk about this when you're stronger." "Please," I insisted. "I need to know." She sighed, then sat on the edge of my bed. "They were called twice. First by a nurse, then by the neurosurgeon himself. They said they couldn't come yesterday. Something about an important meeting and then a golf tournament. Even though I had expected something like this hearing, the confirmation felt like a physical blow. My own parents couldn't be bothered to come to my side when I was fighting for my life. Did they ask about me? About my condition, if I was going to be okay?" Jasmine's silence was answer enough. The pain that flooded through me then had nothing to do with my physical injury. It was an old familiar pain that I had carried since childhood, now amplified beyond bearing. Tears began to stream down my face, and I made no effort to wipe them away. Jasmine squeezed my hand tighter. "I'm so sorry, Danny. You deserve better." The emotional dam broke then, and I sobbed openly for the first time in years. For the little girl waiting at piano recitals, for the teenager accepting awards alone, for the college graduate scanning empty seats, and for the adult still desperately seeking approval from people who had never been capable of giving it. Jasmine held my hand through it all, offering tissues and quiet support. When the storm finally passed, leaving me exhausted, but somehow lighter, she spoke again. "You know what Dr. Curtis told me while you were in surgery? She said that with brain injuries, emotional support is just as important as medical care for recovery. You need people who truly care about you around you right now." I nodded slowly, wincing at the pain the movement caused. "Would you hand me my phone?" I asked, pointing to where it sat charging on a side table. "Are you sure that's a good idea right now?" "I need to hear it directly from them," I said. Just once more. Reluctantly, Jasmine handed me the phone. I found my mother's number and pressed call, putting it on speaker so I wouldn't have to hold it to my still tender head. She answered on the fourth ring. "Danielle, is that you?" "Yes, Mom." My voice sounded strange to my own ears, weakened by surgery and emotion. "Oh, we were so worried when the hospital called. How are you feeling?" The lack of genuine concern in her voice was palpable. There was no emotion, no relief at hearing from me directly. Just the socially appropriate words, without the feelings behind them. "I had brain surgery yesterday, Mom. I could have died." "Don't be dramatic, Danielle. The doctor assured us you were receiving excellent care. Your father and I had commitments we simply couldn't break." The casual cruelty of her response left me momentarily speechless. In the background, I could hear my father asking who was on the phone. "It's Danielle," my mother told him. "She's awake after her procedure." Not, "Thank God she's alive," or "Our daughter made it through surgery." Just a clinical observation that I was conscious. "Mom," I said, finding my voice again. "The doctors called you because they weren't sure I was going to survive. They needed consent for emergency surgery because I was unconscious. And we gave it, she replied, as if that was the extent of parental duty. We trusted the doctors to do their jobs. Will you be coming today? I asked, already knowing the answer but needing to hear it. Of course. We've rescheduled our afternoon appointments. We should be able to leave by 3, so we'll be there sometime this evening, traffic permitting. I closed my eyes, letting the full weight of their indifference wash over me. All these years I had made excuses for them. They were busy. They had demanding careers. They showed love in different ways. But lying in a hospital bed after nearly dying, the truth was inescapable. I had never been a priority in their lives. Don't bother, I said quietly. Excuse me. I said, don't bother coming. I don't want you here. Danielle, my mother's voice took on the familiar tone of disapproval. You're clearly not thinking clearly. We'll see you this evening. Goodbye, Mom, I said, and ended the call. Jasmine stared at me wide-eyed. Are you okay? I wasn't okay, but for the first time in my life I felt like I might eventually be without them. That night sleep eluded me despite the exhaustion and medication. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw fragments of my life, all the moments of disappointment, all the times I had made excuses for my parents' absence, all the ways I had twisted myself trying to earn their approval. The realization that had begun to form when I spoke to my mother crystallized into certainty. This pattern would never change unless I changed it. My headache had subsided to a dull throb thanks to the pain medication, allowing me to think more clearly than I had earlier. I stared at the ceiling illuminated by the dim light from the nurse's station filtering through the partially open door, and mentally retraced my relationship with my parents. I thought about my childhood birthday parties where my parents would make brief appearances before retreating to their home offices. I remembered my high school graduation when they left immediately after the ceremony to attend a networking event, missing the celebration dinner they had promised me. I recalled countless holidays spent watching them check their phones constantly, half listening to anything I said. Then I thought about the people who had shown up for me in the past 24 hours. Jasmine, who rode in the ambulance with me and had barely left my side since. The medical team who had fought to save my life and continued to monitor me with genuine care. Even Mason, who despite our relationship troubles had rushed to the hospital when he heard what happened and promised to return in the morning. These people, some of whom barely knew me, had demonstrated more concern for my well-being than my own parents ever had. The realization was both painful and liberating. I had spent my entire life trying to earn my parents' love, bending myself to their expectations, choosing career paths to please them, seeking validation I would never receive. And in doing so, I had recreated the same dynamic in my relationship with Mason, in my approach to my career, in every aspect of my life. I had become a person who believed love and respect had to be earned through achievement and sacrifice. By 3 in the morning, I had made my decision. I needed a clean break from my parents, from my current life, from the patterns that had shaped me. I needed to start over somewhere new, somewhere I could discover who I really was without the weight of expectations and disappointment. When the night nurse came in to check my vitals, I asked her for pen and paper. "May I ask what you need them for?" she inquired gently. "You should be resting." "I need to write something important," I explained. "Something I should have written years ago." She hesitated, then nodded. "I'll see what I can find." She returned with several sheets of hospital stationery and a ballpoint pen. "Just promise me you'll try to sleep afterward," she said. I thanked her and began to write as soon as she left. The words flowed easily as if they had been waiting years to be released. "Dear Mom and Dad," I began, then poured out everything I had never had the courage to say. I wrote about the little girl waiting for them to show up at her recitals. I described the teenager who stopped telling them about her achievements because their praise never felt genuine. I detailed the young woman who chose a career to please them rather than follow her own dreams. And finally, I wrote about the adult lying in a hospital bed after nearly dying, realizing that life was too precious to waste seeking approval from people who couldn't give it. I needed parents who showed up, I wrote, not just physically but emotionally, not just for the big moments but for the small ones too. Not just when it was convenient, but especially when it wasn't. I needed to know that I mattered more than a meeting, more than a golf tournament, more than whatever else always took priority over me. I'm not writing this to hurt you or to get an apology. I'm writing because I'm finally accepting what I've known deep down for years. You cannot give me what I need. And I cannot keep destroying myself trying to earn your love. This is goodbye. I'm going to build a new life where I value myself enough to surround myself with people who show up. I wish you well, but I won't be a part of your lives anymore. I signed my name, folded the pages, and placed them in an envelope. As promised, I tried to sleep afterward, but my mind was too active with plans and possibilities. By morning, I had mapped out what I needed to do. When Dr. Curtis came for her morning rounds, I asked her directly about discharge. Dr. Curtis, I know you said I would need to stay for about a week, but is there any chance I could leave sooner? I have somewhere important I need to go. She frowned slightly. Danielle, you've just had major brain surgery. The risk of complications is highest in the first few days. Where could you possibly need to go that's more important than your recovery? It's for my recovery, I insisted. Not the physical part, but everything else. She studied my face for a moment, then sat down in the chair beside my bed. Tell me more. I explained my situation, not the detailed history, but enough for her to understand why I needed to leave. I can't be here when they arrive, I concluded. I just can't. Dr. Curtis was silent for a long moment. Normally, I would never consider an early discharge in a case like yours, she finally said. But I've been doing this long enough to know that emotional well-being affects physical recovery. Would you have somewhere safe to go? Someone to monitor you for complications? I've already texted Jasmine. She's offered her guest room and said she can work from home for the next week. Dr. Curtis sighed. Let me be clear, medically, I advise against this. But if you're determined, we can discuss a discharge tomorrow morning, provided your condition remains stable, and you agree to strict home care instructions and follow-up appointments. It was more than I had hoped for. Thank you, Dr. Curtis. Don't thank me yet. If I see any signs of complications between now and then, all bets are off, and you'll need to sign an AMA form against medical advice. I nodded, wincing slightly at the pain the movement still caused. When Jasmine visited later that morning, I shared my plans with her. Are you sure about this? She asked after I explained everything. It's a huge decision to make when you're still recovering. I've never been more sure of anything, I told her. I've spent my whole life waiting for them to change, making excuses for them, blaming myself. I can't do it anymore. She squeezed my hand. Then I'm with you. Whatever you need. With Jasmine's help, I began making arrangements. She would help me gather essential items from my apartment. I would stay with her temporarily while looking for a place in Seattle, a city I had always been drawn to but had never visited because my parents had dismissed it as too far away and too artsy. I called my boss and explained that I had suffered a medical emergency and would be taking an extended leave of absence. To my surprise, he was understanding and supportive, more concerned with my health than the projects I was leaving behind. Using Jasmine's laptop, I booked a one-way ticket to Seattle for the following week, giving myself a few days to regain strength before traveling. I researched apartments, job opportunities in the creative field I had always wanted to pursue, and support groups for people recovering from brain injuries. By evening, I felt exhausted but oddly peaceful. I had set in motion a complete transformation of my life, not despite my medical crisis, but because of it. The aneurysm that nearly killed me had become the catalyst for saving me from a life of emotional deprivation. I placed the letter I had written on the bedside table where it would be found after I was gone. Then I closed my eyes and slept more soundly than I had in years, despite the hospital noises and the lingering pain. I was already feeling the lightness that comes with setting down a burden carried for too long. Carol and Richard Wilson arrived at Northwestern Memorial Hospital at 7:30 p.m. on Thursday evening, nearly 48 hours after their daughter had been rushed into emergency brain surgery. They came bearing an expensive flower arrangement and a gift bag containing luxury pajamas from a boutique on Michigan Avenue, items purchased hastily on their drive into the city. Their expressions as they approached the nurses' station were practiced masks of parental concern, though both had checked emails on their phones during the elevator ride up. "We're here to see our daughter, Danielle Wilson," Carol announced to the charge nurse. "We understand she's recovering from surgery." The nurse looked up from her computer, her expression carefully neutral. "Ms. Wilson has been moved. Let me check which room she's in now." There was a brief pause as she consulted her records. Then a flicker of something surprise or possibly discomfort crossed her face. "If you'll wait here a moment, I'll get Nurse Thompson to speak with you." Carol frowned at the delay, but nodded. She turned to her husband. "I told you we should have called ahead. Now we're going to waste time with administrative nonsense." Richard checked his watch. "We still need to make our dinner reservation at Gibson's. The concierge said it was nearly impossible to get a table this late." Neither of them mentioned their daughter's condition or expressed any anxiety about seeing her after her life-threatening medical emergency. A few minutes later, Nurse Elaine Thompson approached them. She had been present for many difficult family situations throughout her career, but few had affected her as personally as this one. "Mr. and Mrs. Wilson?" she asked, though she knew exactly who they were. "Yes," Carol replied. "We're here to see Danielle. Could you please direct us to her room?" Elaine took a deep breath. "I'm afraid Danielle is no longer here. She was discharged this morning." "Discharged?" Richard's voice rose in surprise. "But we were told she would be hospitalized for at least a week. She had brain surgery just 2 days ago." "She requested an early discharge against medical advice," Elaine explained carefully. "As an adult patient of sound mind, that was her right." "This is ridiculous," Carol said, her voice tight with anger. "We drove all the way from Michigan. Why weren't we informed?" Elaine maintained her professional demeanor despite her personal feelings about the situation. "Danielle specifically requested that we not contact you. Again, as an adult patient, that was her prerogative." "Well, where did she go?" Richard demanded. "We're her parents. We have a right to know." "I'm afraid I can't disclose that information without her consent," Elaine replied. "Patient confidentiality laws prohibit me from sharing any details about her current location or condition." Carol's face flushed with indignation. "This is outrageous. We want to speak to the hospital administrator immediately." "You're welcome to do so," Elaine said calmly. "But the result will be the same. However, Danielle did leave something for you." She reached into her pocket and withdrew the envelope containing Danielle's letter. "She asked that I give you this." Carol snatched the envelope, her manicured nails crumpling the paper slightly. "I want to speak to her doctor as well. Dr. Curtis has finished her shift for the day. She can be reached through her office tomorrow if you'd like to schedule a consultation." Richard placed a restraining hand on his wife's arm, sensing the futility of further argument. "Thank you, nurse," he said stiffly. "We'll take this up with the appropriate channels." As they turned to leave, Elaine called after them, unable to completely suppress her personal feelings. "Mr. and Mrs. Wilson, your daughter nearly died. She had to make life-changing decisions alone because you couldn't be bothered to come when she needed you most. Whatever is in that letter, I suggest you take it seriously." They stared at her in stunned silence, unused to being addressed so directly. Without responding, they walked to the elevator, the unread letter clutched in Carol's hand. In the privacy of the elevator, Carol tore open the envelope and began reading aloud in a low voice. With each sentence, her expression shifted from anger to disbelief to something that in another person might have resembled remorse. "This is absurd," she said when she finished, though her voice lacked conviction. "She's obviously not thinking clearly after her surgery. We need to find her and talk some sense into her." Richard was uncharacteristically quiet, his eyes fixed on the envelope his wife had dropped into his hands. "Carol," he finally said as they reached the lobby, "have you considered that she might be right?" "What are you talking about?" "She's being dramatic as usual. Once she calms down—" "We weren't there," he interrupted, his voice unusually subdued. "Our daughter nearly died and we weren't there because we had a golf tournament." Carol stopped walking, her practiced composure wavering. "We had commitments. We couldn't just—" "Yes, we could have," Richard insisted. "Anyone else would have. What kind of parents does that make us?" For perhaps the first time in their marriage, they stood in a public place having a genuine emotional exchange, rather than a strategic conversation. Around them, the hospital lobby buzzed with activity, families supporting each other's staff, hurrying to their duties, life-changing news being delivered and received. They had existed adjacent to these human moments for decades, without truly participating in them. "Where do you think she would go?" Carol finally asked, vulnerability seeping into her voice. I don't know, Richard admitted. I realize I don't know much about our daughter at all. They made their way to their car in silence, the expensive flowers and gift forgotten in the hospital lobby. The dinner reservation at Gibson's went unclaimed as they drove instead to Danielle's apartment building, hoping to find her there. The security guard informed them that Jasmine had been by earlier that day to collect some items, but hadn't mentioned where Danielle was staying. Mason, when they tracked him down at his apartment, revealed that Danielle had ended their relationship via text message that morning. She said she needed a fresh start. He told them, his own expression a mixture of hurt and resignation, that she was tired of trying to be someone she's not. Did she say where she was going? Carol pressed. No, Mason replied. But honestly, would it matter? Would you actually follow her this time? His question hung in the air unanswered. Back at Danielle's apartment, which they accessed using the emergency key she had reluctantly given them years ago, Richard and Carol found themselves in a space that offered few clues about their daughter's life. The furnishings were tasteful but impersonal, as if Danielle had created a showcase rather than a home. There were no personal photos on display, no mementos from family vacations or celebrations. Carol opened a closet and found a box labeled Memories pushed to the back. Inside were all the items a parent might expect to see displayed proudly in a home academic awards art competition certificates, photographs from significant events, all carefully preserved but hidden away, as if Danielle couldn't bear to look at them daily. At the bottom of the box, Carol found an old photo album. The first page contained a picture of a young Danielle, perhaps 5 years old, beaming at the camera with a gap-toothed smile. Written beneath in childish handwriting were the words "Mommy and Daddy's Recital." The following pages told the story Carol and Richard had never bothered to see Danielle at various performances and achievements, always looking toward the audience with hope, always standing alone in the after photos. Each page documented not just an accomplishment, but an absence. Together, they formed an undeniable pattern that even the most self-deluded parents couldn't ignore. Carol closed the album, her hands trembling slightly. "Richard," she said quietly, "I think we've made a terrible mistake." For the first time in their marriage, Richard didn't offer a practical solution or a way to reframe the situation to their advantage. He simply nodded his own certainties, crumbling in the face of irrefutable evidence of their failure as parents. "What do we do now?" Carol asked, sounding lost. "I don't know," Richard admitted. "But I think it starts with accepting that this isn't about us. It's about Danielle and what she needs." They sat in their daughter's apartment until dawn, surrounded by the artifacts of a life they had barely bothered to witness, finally having the honest conversation they should have had decades earlier, about priorities, about what constitutes success, about the irreplaceable value of simply showing up for the people you claim to love. Whether it would be enough to repair what had been broken remained to be seen, but for the first time they were asking the right questions. 1 year later, I sat at a window table in a coffee shop overlooking Elliott Bay in Seattle, watching the ferry boats cross the water under a rare clear sky. My hair had grown out enough to cover the surgical scar, and physically I had recovered completely from the aneurysm. The emotional healing had taken longer, but had progressed further than I could have imagined on that night in the hospital, when I made my decision to leave everything behind. My small apartment in the Ballard neighborhood had become a true home, filled with the artwork I had finally allowed myself to create again. My new job as a creative director at a small but growing design studio gave me the opportunity to use my marketing skills while nurturing my artistic side. I had made friends who valued me for myself, not for what I could achieve or provide. I had even started dating again cautiously, with a clearer understanding of what healthy relationships should look like. The most significant change, however, was internal. I had learned to recognize my own worth independent of external validation. Therapy had helped me understand the patterns formed in childhood and how they had shaped my adult relationships. I had set boundaries in all areas of my life and discovered that respecting my own needs wasn't selfish, but essential. My parents had not accepted my decision easily. For the first 3 months, they had called repeatedly, left voicemails ranging from angry to pleading, and even hired a private investigator to find me. I maintained my distance, returning the expensive gifts they sent, and having my therapist explain to them that I needed space to heal. Eventually, they seemed to accept my boundaries. The calls stopped, the gifts ceased arriving, and something unexpected happened. They began to change. It started with a letter on my birthday, not a card with a check or gift certificate, but a handwritten letter in which my mother, for the first time in my memory, spoke of her own insecurities and how they had affected her ability to connect emotionally. My father followed with his own letter, acknowledging how his fixation on achievement and status had blinded him to what truly mattered. They enrolled in family therapy. They retired earlier than planned to reevaluate their priorities. They sent occasional updates, but never demanded responses respecting the boundaries I had set. 6 months ago, I had sent them a brief email acknowledging their efforts and suggesting that perhaps in time we might find a new way to relate to each other. Their response had been measured and respectful, without the emotional manipulation I would have expected in the past. And now here I was waiting for them to arrive for our first face-to-face meeting since that day in the hospital. I had chosen a public location to maintain some emotional distance and had scheduled the meeting for just 1 hour. My therapist had helped me prepare, emphasizing that reconciliation, if it happened at all, would be a gradual process requiring consistent evidence of change from both sides. I saw them. Before they saw me, my mother's hair with more gray showing than she would have allowed in the past. My father looking somehow smaller, without the armor of his expensive suits, both of them scanning the cafe nervously. When they spotted me, they didn't rush over, but approached slowly, as if giving me time to change my mind. "Danielle," my mother said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for seeing us." I gestured to the chairs across from me. "Please sit down." The conversation that followed was awkward, halting, and punctuated by long silences, nothing like the polished interactions of our past. But it was also real, in a way our family discussions had never been before. We spoke not of achievements or appearances, but of feelings, regrets, and hopes for the future. "We understand that we may never fully repair what we damaged," my father said toward the end of our time. "But we want you to know that we're committed to trying for as long as it takes, even if it's for the rest of our lives." I looked at them, really looked at them, perhaps for the first time, and saw not the infallible authorities of my childhood, or the neglectful figures of my young adulthood, but simply two flawed humans who had made serious mistakes and were genuinely trying to make amends. "I can't promise you anything," I told them honestly, "but I'm willing to take small steps and see where they lead." As we parted, there were no dramatic embraces or declarations of unconditional forgiveness. There was, however, something that had never existed between us before: authenticity and the fragile beginnings of mutual respect. Walking back to my apartment afterward, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The aneurysm that nearly killed me had become the catalyst for a new life. The parents who couldn't show up when I was unconscious in the hospital had finally shown up in the ways that mattered most by respecting my boundaries, doing their own emotional work, and being willing to build a relationship based on who I actually was, rather than who they wanted me to be. Most importantly, I had learned to show up for myself, to recognize my own value, to honor my own needs, and to create a life aligned with my authentic self, rather than external expectations. I had learned that sometimes you have to be willing to walk away from the people you thought you needed in order to discover your own strength. That setting boundaries isn't selfish, but an act of self-respect. That forgiveness doesn't mean erasing the past, but creating the possibility for a different future. And I had discovered that family isn't defined by biology, but by presence, by who shows up not just in crisis, but in all the small, ordinary moments that make up a life. Sometimes the family you were born into can learn to show up differently. Sometimes you need to create a chosen family of friends and loved ones who value you for exactly who you are. My journey wasn't over healing, rarely follows a neat linear path. But as I looked out at the sunset, painting the Seattle skyline in shades of golden pink, I felt something I had rarely experienced, growing up: a sense of peace, of belonging, of being exactly where I needed to be. I learned that sometimes you need to be brave enough to write your own story, even if it means erasing characters you thought were essential. What about you? Have you ever had to let go of someone you thought you couldn't live without? In order to become the person you were meant to be, leave a comment below and share your experience. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Remember, you deserve people who show up for you not just when it's convenient, but especially when it's not. Thank you for being here with me today.